Well, welcome everyone to our first public dialogue session for CARB's community engagement model. My name is Victoria Villa and I use she, her pronouns. I'm a staff air pollution specialist with the Enforcement Division at CARB, and I'm part of the team working on the community engagement model. We're excited to host this meeting and have you here with us. Thank you for joining. Before we dive in, there are a few things we need to go over. First, today's meeting will be recorded and give the public an opportunity to listen in. Second, we have Spanish interpretation. I will let our interpreters repeat this information, and then we will go through how to access these services for the meeting. We will also share how to rename yourself and use Zoom.
Thank you so much, Victoria. Muy buenas noches a todos ustedes. Esta reunión se llevará a cabo en inglés. Sin embargo, en breve se proporcionarán también servicios de interpretación. Ahorita, en un segundo, proporcionará en la parte inferior de su pantalla un icono en forma de un mundo. Favor de presionar ese mundo, elegir español, presionarlo nuevamente y después usted podrá poner en silencio audio original. Si tiene algún problema, favor de escribirlo en el chat, alzar su mano o mandar un comentario para que lo podamos asistir. Muchísimas gracias. Victoria, back to you.
Thank you, Aldo. Okay, so next slide. Let's go over language interpretation. I'm going to walk you through the 3 steps to adjust the language interpretation settings, pausing after each step to allow for our interpreters to translate. So first, in your meeting and webinar controls, click on interpretation located at the bottom of the screen.
Así que en breve vamos a repasar las indicaciones. Ahorita el número 1 va a haber a la parte de abajo de su pantalla, va a haber un botón en su pantalla principalmente con esa forma de un mundo que comentábamos anteriormente.
Next, click on the language that you would like to hear. Options for this meeting are English and Spanish.
Va a haber los idiomas en la parte inferior, elija el idioma de su preferencia para que pueda escuchar la reunión ya sea en inglés o en español.
To only hear the interpreted language, click Mute Original Audio.
Para que pueda escuchar solamente el idioma de su preferencia, favor de presionar silenciar audio original.
Okay, so let's start the interpretation services, please. Okay, next slide. Before we get started, let's go through how to rename and mute and unmute. So let's start off with how to rename ourselves. To rename, click on the top right side of your picture or video and select Rename. Please type your first name, last name, and affiliation. Your affiliation could be your community organization, agency, air district, company, resident, etc. If you need help, please use the chat feature to request assistance. Next slide. Next, let's go over how to mute and unmute yourself. Please remain on mute when you're not speaking. To mute or unmute, please click on the button on the bottom left. If you're calling in, dial *6 to mute or unmute. Next slide. Now let's go over the video settings. Click on the camera icon at the bottom left of your screen to toggle your video on and off. Next slide. Let's talk about the raise hand feature. To be added to the speaking queue, please use raise hand. If you're on the Zoom app, click participants, then select raise hand. If you're calling in, dial *9 and we'll check with you on the phone and we'll check the phone line periodically. Okay. Next slide. Lastly, let's review the chat feature. Click on the chat icon near the center bottom of your screen. Choose private chat to chat with host or co-host. Please note that private chats, even amongst participants, will be archived and CARB staff will be able to see them. Next slide. So tonight we'll cover the following agenda topics. We'll have a meeting overview, which will last about 20 minutes. We'll have an initial round of breakout rooms where we will go into introductions, and that'll take about 25 minutes. We'll break for about 10 minutes. After that, we'll go into a second round of breakout rooms for about 30 minutes. After which we'll come back and report back for 15 minutes. We'll conclude with a wrap-up and next steps, which will take about 5 minutes. We do want to note that staff are happy to stay around for 30 minutes after the meeting ends at 8 p.m. if you would like to discuss this meeting or the model. Next slide. Okay, so for a meeting, we ask that all attendees follow a set of meeting agreements. We ask that attendees please be present and be respectful. Let's be kind to each other. Let's create a space where everyone feels comfortable sharing their opinions and experiences. Let's also remember to take space and make space. If you're usually quiet, challenge yourself to take more space. If you're usually talkative, please be mindful to leave room for the quieter voices. Let's also listen to understand. Let's practice active listening to each other. Let's remember that all ideas and points have value. Let's honor time overall. And finally, we want to develop solutions with equity in mind. Let's remember that equity is the idea that not everyone starts from the same page, and that some might have unique advantages and barriers. We want to recognize those barriers that exist in some communities in order to tailor solutions to their unique challenges. If there are any other additional meeting agreements you would like to share or prioritize, please raise your hand to speak or write it in the chat. Okay, let's go on to the next slide then. Okay, so let's start off with a quick introduction of CARB and the CARB staff working on this effort, many of which you'll meet in the breakout rooms. So let's start off with talking a little bit about CARB. So CARB is in charge of protecting the public from harmful effects of air pollution and developing programs and actions to fight climate change. The community engagement model staff are tasked with developing the community engagement model. We don't have time to introduce the entire team, so the following slides are going to introduce the staff. Staff include Pablo, Aldo, Antonio, Samantha, Jonathan, Karina, Gretchen, Noemi, Wente, and Erica, as well as Deidre, Jose, myself, Victoria, Joyce, Lana, Lisa, Lachey, and Amanda. Please note that not all staff members were able to attend this meeting, but several are on the meeting and are available to answer questions throughout. With that, let's move on to the reasons why you're here tonight, which is to discuss the community engagement model. Next slide. Okay, so we're here tonight to ask for your help to develop the community engagement model for CARB to guide how we work with communities on our projects, our programs, our policies, and our regulations. So we're just going to refer to that as CARB actions from here on out. Next slide. Okay, so while CARB values the involvement and engagement of community stakeholders, we acknowledge that our engagement efforts have not always been robust or consistent across the agency. CARB staff have been requesting support to provide them with the tools needed to integrate equitable community engagement into their work. As a result, we're developing an agency-wide community engagement model and training to help staff engage with communities. We're also hoping to ensure that CARB engagement brings in diverse and hard to reach groups. Lastly, we hope that the engagement model will help ensure that CARB's impacts increasingly lead to more equitable, especially racial equity outcomes for all Californians. Next slide. So at CARB, when we discuss racial equity, we're focusing on two things. First, racial equity as a process. So what that means is that meaning how we engage with communities that are most impacted by our decision-making actions. Second, as an outcome, meaning how can we use engagement and our knowledge of existing inequities to create actions that work to address longstanding inequities. We see these two parts of racial equity as inseparable. Next slide. Okay, so very quickly, we want to explain the process we have used to develop this model. We started in 2022, and that's when we started to draft a model based on our experiences and known best practices. In 2023, CARB developed contracts with 20 community experts to provide us with in-depth feedback on that draft model. We want the model to reflect community needs, which is why in 2023 through 2024, we're hosting 10 public dialogue sessions, the first of which you're in now. So 2 of those meetings are going to be online, and the other 8 will be in person across the state. In 2024, we'll incorporate that feedback and revise the model. 2024 through 2025, we'll develop training based on the model for CARB staff. From 2024 on, we'll take the lessons learned and revise the model and training as needed. Okay, next slide. Let's talk a little bit about our community experts. So as I mentioned, CARB developed contracts for 20 community experts from across the state. They were selected through an open and competitive application process and chosen based on their community engagement experiences. We're meeting with those experts over the course of 7 months to hear in-depth feedback, which we're going to be using to revise the model. The map that you see here highlights the diverse range of locations where community experts are from. A goal of this work is to ensure that the model represents the diversity across the state. Here's a link to the website that provides pictures and biographies of the community experts. Okay, next slide. We also want to give a brief overview of how we're collecting feedback and what we're doing with it. We have 4 major ways to collect feedback. First, we're taking written and verbal feedback from our community experts. Second, we're taking written and verbal feedback from the community dialogue sessions, which is this meeting. Third, there's an online form for community engagement model, on the community engagement model webpage where people can submit written comments. Fourth, we have a phone message system where people can leave voicemails and we'll transcribe those. We're taking all of that feedback and tracking it on a spreadsheet, and we're going to use that to improve the model. We'll report back on summary level comments and outcomes. We'll also make the spreadsheet publicly available, but recognize that thousands of comments will be hard for the public to review. Next slide. Okay, so what is the model? What is this model that we keep on talking about? Well, it has 4 major parts to it. It's composed of a narrative, plan, implement, and close, which walks staff through the full engagement process. Let's talk about the individual components. So next slide, narrative. The first part of the model is the narrative, which provides historical context as to why the community engagement model is being developed and background on why community engagement is essential to our work. Next slide. Next is the plan template. So the second part of the draft community engagement model is the plan template, which provides CARB staff with guidance and questions to consider when planning their community engagement. It helps staff set clear goals and objectives and develop flexible near and long-term community engagement efforts for communities with diverse needs. Next slide. Next is the implement component. So the implement template focuses on implementing the outreach and engagement activities and the strategies that were identified in the prior plan template. This template offers practical resources, including how to promote engagement activities, acquire translation and interpretation services, host welcoming events, and evaluate those events. Okay, next slide. The fourth part of the community engagement model is the close template. It provides CARB staff with guidance when closing the loop with stakeholders by informing them how their feedback was considered and how it influenced CARB actions they were engaged in, as well as potential next steps.